we think about ourselves solely, but not necessarily about how us being business owners, entrepreneurs, how that affects the family unit, how the men in our life can help us be healthier, and how we can support them in equally being healthier, so we can get closer to what it is that we want. And so he's been very helpful. Chris Rumor is very grateful. He's been very helpful as we have conversations about health, women's health, men's health, and the healthy landscape of our families and communities. So please welcome my dear friend, Bezich. Yes. And Louis, I want you to just, if you could, as we do on our regularly programmed show. So we've been meeting about every 2 weeks, 3 years now, really talking about what really affects the health and livelihood of people, but primarily men, and the men that are in our lives, so we can better help the family unit. So if you could just reintroduce yourself, my darling friend, not only to the people that are watching, but the people here, that'd be great.
So just like we do it, we tape our segments. I'm Louis Bezich, men's health advocate, contributing writer to phillyvoice.com, and of course, the author of Crack the Code, 10 Proven Secrets that Motivate Healthy Behavior and Inspire Fulfillment in Men Over 50. Over 50. It's great to be together.
I know, some of us have men over 50.
Yeah.
Chris Rumor is 47, he'll remind me.
Okay.
But he's not. But I think that what you've been so instrumental in really talking to me and helping me understand are the little things and practical things that we can do to change bigger issues that may come along the way, right? And then how that affects us as a whole, as a community, as a family. And do you agree that it's not drastic things that need to change, maybe just like small things?
Little things. But number one, thanks so much for being here. This is an amazing conference.
Thank you.
I listened to some of it, and congrats to everybody here. And we shall put all this together.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
But I guess I would start by saying that what the science tells us, and I always like to base everything I talk about, because I am not a clinician, I am not a doctor, but I have what I would call lived experience. And we'll talk about that in a minute, right? What does that mean? And I am a guy over 50, although the more we get into this, we realize that the principles and the concepts about healthy behavior that I talk about and I advocate for are really for men and women of all ages.
Absolutely.
And the core thing that you want to recognize, and I always talk about, is that at the heart of everything else, relationships are there. Relationships equal healthy behavior.
Yes.
Look at the Harvard study of adult development. It's the longest study in history of men. They followed generations of men. They're like into the great-grandchildren now.
Right,
and they found that, if you've got good social relationships, that goes a long way. And the other thing that science tells us is that if a man leads a healthy lifestyle, it's more likely that the woman in the relationship will do so, and vice versa. So part of my appearance here today is to ask for help.
He's pleading for them all.
I'm pleading for my gender out there, right? As the sole representative, the other half of the universe here.
Can I come and ask for help? I said yes. You can come and ask for help.
Right, because chapter 14 in the book talks about the role of women in men's health.
I know.
I call women the most valuable players in the game of men's health because you have such an ability to influence positive behavior.
Yeah.
Because it's not easy.
It's just not.
It's not easy.
It's just not.
There was data that came out just last month from the Cleveland Clinic. They do a great survey about men's health every year.
Yeah.
And once again, 60% of millennials and 60% of boomers and Gen X get a annual physical. But the younger generation is even worse, like 32% of millennials
are only getting it. Only 32%?
32% of the younger ones and 60%. Still,
they're not going to the doctors?
They don't go to the doctor. Not even once a year, right? Right.
What do you mean?
Gen Y's.
Because we stopped making the appointments.
Exactly. Well,
what in the heck?
It's all about what the book is all about and what my advocacy is all about. It's that, obviously diet and exercise is at the core, and we've got to do that. But you're not going to get there without the motivation.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where the relationships come into play.
Yeah.
Right? What do we have to look forward to? What is there in our lives, that would give us the motivation to stay in shape,
Yeah.
right? I talk about the fact that for men over 50, at 50 we sort of like are now entering the second half of the game of life.
Yeah.
Right? And men might think, you'd assume that, well, maybe, I'm looking at graduations for children and grandchildren, I'm looking at weddings, I'm looking at travel, maybe encore careers,
Yeah.
all these things to live for, but what's the bottom line or the common denominator amongst all that? Well, you gotta be healthy enough
Yeah,
to do that.
You gotta be healthy enough to do all these things.
Right. What do men do?
Yeah.
Do they get healthy?
No.
We do the opposite. We become more sedentary, we neglect our health, and consequently we die younger than women, unfortunately, and we have more chronic disease than
He's
women.
begging for help.
So that's,
But it's
that's
true.
the issue.
But I think we talked about it. We talked about really it being a family affair. But even for us, I think that us as women, it's hard to work out if your partner doesn't want to work out, right? It's hard to have healthy things in the house if the partner doesn't want to have healthy things in the house. It's hard for you to prioritize your health and well-being if your partner is not prioritizing your health and well-being. This conference, our theme is building communities, strengthening relationships. And if your business, your leadership, your executive goals are going against what's happening in your household, it is very, very hard to reach those goals. So if you are together, listen, Sheldon didn't say get a divorce. I'm not saying that. Sheldon Lewis didn't say, I'm tagging you into Lewis didn't say get a divorce. What we're saying is, how can we make it a family affair? What are some things that we can do? Because if you are healthy and those around you are healthy, we can apply this to our office. So my team doesn't want to start doing runs together or start going on, maybe we'll go on walks. But what are some types of things we can do together to create that connection and then lead to a healthier lifestyle overall? What are some suggestions that you might provide?
Well, beyond the active social agenda, which is like, every Friday night, let's go out to dinner and have a healthy meal together, or let's talk about, a trip and things like that. But then day to day is, how can we plan our meals, that we both can enjoy, and that takes some work and it takes some
Planning.
trial and error and that type of thing to do that. So that's one thing, and obviously some form of exercise. It can be as simple as just take a walk around the block.
Yeah. And reconnect both physically and mentally. I think that's important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's very practical. It's about doing it together, about sharing thoughts and ideas. Schedules are difficult.
Yeah.
Kids and grandkids and
Yeah.
everything else, makes our world complicated.
Yeah.
But you gotta put in the time.
Yeah.
Anything that's worthwhile in this world, right? Takes a little time and commitment. That's the kind of things I hear you guys talk about.
Yeah, no, I love this. I think really about, one of the things that we talked about so many times and really motivates me. I have a 13-year-old and a 7-year-old. You guys see them on social, my children. They are really a motivating factor in the calendar of events, that I'm looking forward to, right? When my knee is bothering me, so I'm like, it's fine. It's like, will I be able to dance at my daughter's wedding, right? Like, will I be able, you know what I mean, to cut it up? Not just dance, of course. Right? Well, is that a benchmark for me?
Absolutely.
Or will it be, okay, get mommy a chair, right? Like, what does it kind of look like? That doesn't mean that is not equated with a specific weight. That is not equated with right? The scale doesn't have to say something specific. It has to do with my mobility and activity. And I'm longing for that for the whole of my family, right? I want us all to be able to dance at the wedding. I want us all, and I think that also when we are worried about our spouses, right? When we're worried about our spouses, our partners, our dads, this is a group that is part of a sandwich generation, right? That have not only taken care of our spouses, not that we take care of you solely, but we do. Not only taking care of our spouses, but we also have our parents and our children, in some cases, that we have to really look after. We feel burdened to look after everyone, so we want easier ways to look after you, Louis. We want easier ways to get you to the doctor. Right.
Well, there's two things to do. One is, do the math, right?
Yeah.
How old will I be when, my grandson Luca graduates from college?
Yeah.
I've run that.
I know.
But the other thing that I find a lot of motivation in is what I call intergenerational relationships.
Oh.
You know, I have a 7-year-old grandson, and he just took up cross country. He started running a little bit. So a few weeks ago, with his mother and myself, we did a 5K together.
Oh.
Now, we didn't make it, you know, we both finished at a different pace, whatever, but it was just cool to hang out there. And to do something together. And there are so many opportunities on this, you know, because it's the young ones that give the older ones the motivation, and then vice versa. You want to give a good example. I mean, one of the things that we've got to stop for men is this passage of these antiquated views of masculinity from generation to the next. That's a big issue these days. You know, in my world, masculinity, we have these, you know, Neanderthal, you know, concepts that says, well, I don't need to go to the doctor. You know, colonoscopy, no, that's not for me.
For sure.
You know, that can I consider, you know, not even an annual physical.
Not even an annual physical. It's
insane. You know, I tell guys, look, we go out on Sundays and watch these NFL players.
Yeah.
That are pampered with physicians and trainers.
Yes.
But when it comes up, no, we don't want to do that. So we need help changing that antiquated view of masculinity.
For sure.
That's so much of the behavior of men is that generation after generation of masculinity passed along, and we've got to change that.
And I think also, at least for me, to have support and to do it together helps in the overarching. I mean, I'm a busy. How many of you are busy? Oh, right. And so we're trying to find ways to incorporate, and the last thing that often is on that list is taking care of ourselves. And the additional burden is, okay, now I've got to take care of you. And then I got to take care of the kids. And then I got to make sure mommy's got to do this. And I'm talking about my mommy, even though everybody's better. She's out there, right? And we're making sure that everyone is taken care of and in a way that fits into our schedule. And I know that we've always talked about suggested ways to incorporate it into our lives, you know, as a family unit, as opposed to fighting against the schedule, right? Are there things that we can do together in order to create a healthier lifestyle across the board, as opposed to mom's doing this, or she's doing this, they're doing this, he's doing this, right? And running in silos. Because as a busy woman, I find that in my household, we're running in silos. In a lot of cases, we're passing the baton, right? I've seen them days, right? You pick up this one, I pick up that one, you pick up this one, who's made this one? I'm ordering, I made food, it's in the fridge, right? It'll be like in that way. Are there suggestions that you have to kind of bringing it back to center? I'm like, please help me with. Are there suggestions in bringing it back to center? And is it simply, not simply, but is it a need for prioritizing?
Well, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
You know, just like everything is you know,
Something
obviously
to
the
say.
kids and the schools are a top priority,
Sure.
but as you just said, you know, taking care of yourself has to be in there.
It has to be.
It's got to be on that list.
Yes.
Is it difficult? Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, our lives are logistical nightmares,
Yes.
right? But you know, you got to do like everything. You got to bring it to the table. You got to come up with a strategy. Like for me, I'm an early morning guy because you know, by the end of the day, and this goes back for the last 30 years in my professional career, I'm shot. So, and I'm hungry, and so I said to myself a long time ago, if this is going to work, I've got to get up early and I've got to do it. I love it. You know, it's like any other habit that becomes a routine and a ritual, and that's really the infrastructure behind, you know, how do you sustain the healthy lifestyle, right? It's that routines and rituals, they start as, you know, practice, and they move to habits, and then they become ingrained. I can't imagine not, you know, getting up early, having a cup of coffee, I check the headlines, I'm ready, you know, and then I'm at the gym. And I feel like, you know, check that box every day, right? And you feel good. And when you get to the point where if you don't do that, then you don't feel something's missing.
I think that there's something interesting about that, because I think that oftentimes, we talked about this too, we look at fads as we're thinking, and as I'm sitting thinking, okay, what can we do? How can we do this? But I think even before we get to a plan, just like you just mentioned, getting to know yourself literally. Like, what is my husband willing to do? Right? Like, not just like, okay, we're gonna do this now. Children, are we really gonna do this now? Like, is this man really gonna do this thing? Like, you know him now, right?
If you tell him like that,
right, it's not gonna work. Like, how can it be based around? And I love that idea, because you know who you are, and catering it around who you are, and therefore who they are, to create something that is manageable and realistic, versus something that is confrontational and a drain, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
the drain will already have that negative connotation around getting healthy when it's not supposed to be a negative thing. Do you agree?
Absolutely, no, you've got to work with each other. A good example of what I pitch to men oftentimes from a dietary standpoint is, the Mediterranean diet.
Okay.
It's highly rated, and it doesn't mean you can't eat meat.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you can't eat pork or even seafood.
Yeah.
It just means proportionately.
Yeah.
Right? The fruits and the vegetables and stuff should be a bigger portion of the plate than like the
Yes.
Tito kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right? So I mean, that's to me, it's a compromise. It's a thing.
Smaller thing.
It's the little stuff like that gets you there. But it has to be, a partnership. If you tell somebody like this is the way it's going to work, that doesn't.
It's not going to work. I tried. It's not going to work. I think that also, we don't realize, and we've talked about this also, the importance of getting people on board, right? If you're fighting against your home internally, like if you're trying to better yourself in some type of way, and there's literally individuals in that same space that aren't necessarily, it's going to be very hard for you to really break through those barriers to take care of yourself.
Yep.
So finding ways to be able to do it together. The most recent one that we did, and I know this might be off script, but I found it very interesting, especially because we have a lot of mothers in this audience, and a lot of people, of course, who are working home and working remotely. We were talking, our last one was about loneliness.
Yeah.
And loneliness being a real health crisis, and what's going on in this moment. A lot of people, that are working from home haven't left their house in weeks.
Yeah.
And that's real. You're fine. But that's real. You're Instacarting, you're DoorDashing,
Sure.
you're Zooming, right? In the space, and there's really, your car's got dust on it in the lot, right? Unless it's an occasion, you're not leaving.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you're not interacting with people online, but you haven't gone to an event, you haven't visited anyone's house. Just talk, I know that that's not necessarily based on what we're talking about here, but I was so moved by it because I think that there's a lot of people out there that are suffering from loneliness. And that loneliness can really manifest itself into some serious health.
Oh yeah, look, it's a validated public health crisis in the U.S. The U.S. Surgeon General declared loneliness a public health crisis.
Right.
The trouble is that men have an even more difficult time coping with it because, again, that definition of masculinity, we're not going to tell anybody we feel down, we're depressed, we're lonely. God forbid a guy should admit he's lonely.
Right.
And then, so one of the big antidotes to that is, of course, develop relationships.
Right.
Now we know that you guys are phenomenal at relationships. You bump into each other, now you're going out to lunch.
We love it. We love it. We got staycation.
Guys will maybe go grab a beer or talk sports, but in
Yeah.
terms of really developing relationship, we're not that good at it.
Right.
And so not only do we not express ourselves, and then when we don't, it just gets worse, and that's why, unfortunately, men are like 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of ugly statistics that result from that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's important and just because you don't sit home doesn't mean you're not lonely.
Right.
It's like this.
That is such an
loneliness out
important
there.
point. That
And
is
so,
such an important point.
ask your guy, try to break through the barrier and find out what's going on, and try to bring them together. Because again, and obviously one of the biggest things to fight on this is lead a healthy lifestyle.
Right,
We're back to that again.
Yeah.
But to your other point, I wanted to mention that what can you do? What you guys are really great at is saying like, what's the future look like?
Yeah.
To the dad or to the spouse or to the uncle or whomever. Like think about just our world, whether it be the children, the grandchildren. Like what's in line for that?
Sure.
What's in line for retirement? What are the possibilities there?
Yeah.
You now have a goal. You have something to aspire to do.
Yeah.
You have your
aspirations.
I hate the bucket list thing, but
No, it's okay.
But
a bucket list is not a bad thing.
it's something
take a
to
bucket
aspire
list.
to do and a reason to stay healthy.
Reason to stay
Not to
healthy.
mention, you might save a few bucks in your
Right.
healthcare costs and
Right.
your insurance premiums. I don't want to
Right.
get into that part of it, but
No, that's true.
my day job, what pays the bills is I work at a healthcare organization.
Yeah.
And there's another dimension.
Yeah.
If the social angle doesn't work, try the economic pitch.
Right, it's expensive.
Yeah, it's
to be
expensive to get sick.
But I really think that the community, being healthy as a community, I think is important. And ultimately, even from a mental standpoint, from that loneliness space, I loved what you said, and we kind of grazed over it, is that just even those of us who are surrounded by people are lonely. Right? Those of us physically have people around us, but people who don't see or hear us clearly, who don't have true connections with people. We also talked about the difficulty, especially when you're at a certain age, finding new friends, right? Like you are so, like there was a way to do it. Kindergarten, everybody had a name tag, everybody could figure it out.
Yeah.
Miss Stoker was putting you in little groups, little pods, and you could kind of figure it out. You're like, okay, he was in the neighborhood, we went out and played. And now as women, and even just in general, definitely men, like my husband's not going out meeting, maybe you are, Chris, I don't know, meeting new friends, right? But I think that ultimately it's difficult, right? Because you're in your own ways and being able to figure that out. One of the things, especially with the over 50 space, and Jody's here and has took on a group for empty nesters in particular, right? Like once you're part of that space, then it's like, okay, when your life was really consumed with kids and schedules and all of those scenarios that Jody and I have talked about it many times, about what does your life consist of now, right?
Right.
Or what do you fill it with? And there might be a sense of loneliness that comes along with not necessarily having even the noise of your children kind of coming up and down the stairs.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the best antidotes to loneliness is, having something to be passionate about.
Yeah.
Right? Having a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
And that purpose can come from, an encore career. It can come from grandchildren. It can come from, it can come from volunteering. There's any number of things that can give somebody purpose in their life. Men's health gives me purpose.
Yes.
A reason to go out and advocate for the things I believe in so very much. And so purpose is a real key factor in fighting loneliness.
Well, I'm so excited that you joined me today.
Thank you
This
so
was
much.
a purposeful conversation.
Thank you.
And every time that you chat with me, I learn something new. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
A round of applause for me. We have work to do.